Welcome everyone to this masterclass with Renée Cummings, who is going to be sharing on designing for algorithmic justice. Thanks, Renée.
Thank you very much, Margaret. And of course, designing for algorithmic justice is one of the most critical conversations at this moment as we advocate for ethical AI and promote conversations for responsible tech and AI we can trust. At the start of 2021, close to 60% of the world's population, roughly 4.66 billion people across the globe, used the internet, and that figure continues to grow. In the last 12 months, 319 million new users came online. Most internet users, about 92.6%, use mobile devices to go online. Your mobile phone is now a crime scene. And that's why today law enforcement uses mobile handsets as part of their investigation. So you've got to think about this. The mindset of law enforcement is that the mobile phone is now a crime scene, and that crime scene reveals the pathology of the user. And what are they looking for? Access points, app data, call lists, contact lists, custom dictionary, file structures, geotags, instant messaging, your multimedia messaging service, photos, registered accounts, text messaging, usage time, videos, web browsing. So critical data is contained in a mobile handset. And the police has access to it. Your data can be weaponized against you in real time. Algorithmic policing, geofencing, and geolocation warrants, digital subpoenas can give the police real-time access to you and everything you do and everyone you do it with. The future of policing in criminal justice is about technoscience, criminal justice technoscience, AI tools and techniques and using data, crime data, personal data, gang data, associational data, location data, environmental data, sensors and surveillance. In the UK, Big Brother Watch, a nonprofit dedicated to pushing back against the unfair use of surveillance technologies, released a video which was featured recently in the film Coded Bias of a 14-year-old schoolboy in his school uniform who was stalked, stopped, searched, and fingerprinted by the police on the streets of London. He was 14. He was shocked. He was confused, not knowing what he had done because he was simply walking with a group of friends, did not know why he was targeted. Actually, he did nothing more than walking while being Black. He didn't know that he could have refused to be fingerprinted, or that he could have asked to call his parents or a guardian, a caregiver, or a lawyer. It all happened so quickly and among so many people. After he was embarrassed, humiliated, and violated, he was told everything is okay. You can carry on. That's why, as a criminologist, I believe that criminal justice must be the conscience of artificial intelligence because it deals with life and liberty, and it is a space where we can see in real time, just excuse me, how easily technology, data, algorithms can be weaponized against us. As the historic first data activist in residence at the School of Data Science at the University of Virginia, I'm always asked, and I say this repeatedly, what is a data activist? And I say the data activist is the conscience of the data scientist. So conscience and raising consciousness, building ethical awareness and due diligence, and developing ethical resilience and eternal vigilance are critical to my work as an AI ethicist. As a criminologist, my work examines algorithmic decision-making systems in policing, sentencing, and corrections. It explores using AI to reduce recidivism or reoffending and enhance rehabilitation. In policing, my work investigates the real-time risks of big data policing, predictive analytics, algorithmic policing, and intrusive surveillance technologies that are redefining privacy and challenging our definition of public space. My work seeks to bring an ethical approach to the application of algorithms in policing and just about any other discipline, industry, or field. Where in policing, however, we have some more critical questions to answer because the discretionary power of the police now belongs to an algorithm. An algorithm is dictating the pace of due process and procedural justice. An algorithm is now what we are looking for in that AI black box because proprietary rights and intellectual property and trade secrets, the legal protections of algorithms are taking priority over protecting civil rights and human rights. So big data policing has given rise to digital profiling, predictive policing systems disproportionately targeting street crimes instead of crimes in the suites, and taking a very traditionalist approach to training classification models by using geospatial features and historical crime data, which have proven time and time again to be unreliable and biased. In policing, we are seeing that without reasonable suspicion, and without a warrant, algorithms are doing a lot of damage as they delve deep into our lives. And without reasonable suspicion, we can become a person of interest in real time to the police without ever knowing until we are about to be arrested. Law enforcement's use of algorithms and facial recognition technology is unregulated in the US and the UK and really out of control. Now the police are using biometric networks against law abiding citizens. This is unprecedented and highly problematic. No probable cause required to obtain information on you. No court order required to access your biometrics by law enforcement. In big data policing, there's also an over reliance on large data sets, rife with racial, economic, gendered, disability, sexuality biases, deeply ingrained cultural prejudices, structural hierarchies, and the oversampling of high needs and underserved communities. And of course, data from over policed communities would naturally record more crimes in high needs and underserved communities, which result in data that say we need more police in the areas we already have more police in those over policed communities and those over policed street corners. So the paradox of police data is that it is mainly used internally by policing agencies rather than a public record that is collected to support accountability and transparency and ventilated through public oversight. So, could police data be trusted? Could algorithms designed for policing using historical data be trusted? We've got to think about that. Who's doing the collecting, the classifying, the analyzing of police data? Are they trained to do it? Do they understand what they're doing? Is police data available to the public for scrutiny and oversight? No, it's not. Did the police disclose or do the police disclose the many challenges with the documentation of data and data collection? No, they don't. In criminal justice, we have seen the dangers of AI, from arrests by algorithms to arraignment by algorithms, algorithms rewriting how justice is administered, the outsourcing of criminal justice decisions, critical decisions to opaque algorithms and risk scores, which frustrate due process and systematically overestimate the risks of Black and Brown defendants because data continue, sadly, and unfortunately, to be color coded. In sentencing, we have seen algorithms that have also been disproportionately unfair and racially biased against Black and Brown defendants. Algorithms codifying unconscious bias and systemic racism. In corrections, we have seen risk assessment tools built with algorithms using biased historical data that frustrate parole hearings. We continue to misuse risk assessment tools in corrections. Yet algorithmic decision-making systems and algorithmic risk assessment tools continue to deny some individuals parole because proxies for race have become data points for risk, family stability, and socioeconomic factors that correlate with structural poverty, unemployment, financial history, educational history, zip codes or postal codes are sadly part of the data that build models used to assess criminal risk and criminality. Using data from racially biased criminal justice systems have led to measurable biases in both risk scores and outcome measures because for several challenges that present themselves. Foundational issues of data collection and standardization, critical to think about, and the potential for bias in training data and algorithms. This will continue unless we find the courage and ways to regulate the use of algorithms across industries and sectors. Machine bias is real. The widely cited ProPublica investigation of 2016 revealed how software was biased against Black defendants in the criminal justice system in the sentencing process. Black defendants were assigned higher recidivism risk scores. So a high score means you stay in jail, a low score, you go home and await trial. A recent study, one of the first and most in depth independent assessments of what happens when algorithms are injected into the justice system, found the deployment of algorithms in criminal justice missed its goals and created new inequities. Sadly, the impacts are different than what policymakers had hoped for. The more crucial question that is still unanswered is whether risk assessments actually help judges make better decisions and achieve the tool's stated goals. Vendors of criminal justice AI continue to overpromise the effectiveness and efficiency of their tools as they seek, of course, lucrative contracts with law enforcement and criminal justice agencies without disclosing the risks created, without disclosing as well the dubious and dangerous situations created because many criminal justice practitioners are unaware of the presenting risks of new and emerging technologies. More and more, we are seeing human agents being placed in, more and more, we are seeing human agents being replaced with algorithms and autonomous agents, creating wide accountability and transparency gaps and casualties of algorithmic justice. As a criminologist, I have seen when AI gets it brutally wrong and how destructive an algorithm could be, and how, in the blink of an eye, a false prediction in the criminal justice system can change the trajectory of a life and create a history of intergenerational trauma for individuals and families. But algorithms are making critical decisions with machine learning, deep learning, and unsupervised learning, little or no actual human input on the system's decision making process is required. Predictive power is the product of mathematical optimization informed by a data set. When the power of our models is premised on uninterpretable combinations of constants and variables, it's very easy to implement destructive and discriminatory policies without accepting responsibility or without even knowing what we have done. And if so, who's to blame when AI inflicts harm? And what subtle harms may we miss as we are using these algorithmic decision making systems? Then there's the question of fairness, critical to accountability and transparency and explainability, critical to responsible, principled, ethical, and trustworthy AI. Fairness is a central value in the creation of AI systems, not only in criminal justice, but in healthcare, in hiring, in education, in finance, in just about every industry. And fairness can be defined in different ways. And with each definition, and with each interpretation of fairness giving rise to a different mathematical representation. So, mathematically, how do we formalize intuitive judgments on a situation or on a policy? So, the supposed neutrality and objectivity of algorithms are insufficient and more so fallacies. What's required are explanations, justifications, and contextual information, and of course, a situation of appeal and a system of redress. Algorithmic accountability is critical, and more countries are requiring that businesses using high risk automated decision making systems that predict work performance and financial situation and health must conduct these algorithmic impact assessments. Tech companies must regularly evaluate their tools for accuracy, fairness, bias, and discrimination. But do they? Do they really? Unlike the US, the UK, France, Australia, all have tech legislation to hold tech companies accountable. But is the legislation, the ethical frameworks that are published annually, the codes of conduct, the professional standards, and other guidelines robust enough to hold tech companies to account? When these same companies are providing governments internationally with the infrastructure, the hardware, and the software required for digital transformation. And when some tech companies have more power than some countries, the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, the European Data Protection Law, is definitely more dynamic than US law. But is that even enough? Actually, it's proving not to be. Therefore, we must balance ethics with innovation because ethics will not stifle innovation. Ethics must be integrated across the AI lifecycle. Ethics must create an environment of careful stewardship, informed public debates, public engagement, public consultation, public awareness, public education, and how AI benefits will be distributed. These are what emerging technologies impact society and how society should respond. These are some of the critical conversations we must have. And as we advocate for more justice oriented design principles and ethical algorithmic solutions, we have got to understand that diversity, equity, and inclusion are so crucial to expanding the imagination of AI. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are also critical to create that buffer against the dangers of the design monoculture and create space for intellectual confrontation, emotional intelligence, and diverse intelligences. It's about collective intelligence, not only artificial intelligence. We cannot continue to deploy AI into criminal justice without fully understanding and addressing its fundamental challenges and deficiencies. We have witnessed a proliferation of cases in which bias in AI continues to show up, and we are now burdened by the painful process of self-correction. There's much to be gained by forging ahead boldly, and an equal amount to be lost if we place sensitive decisions in the hands of algorithmic decision-making systems and autonomous systems that just aren't ready to make those decisions. So if we are not cautious and not ethically aware and don't detect, mitigate, and monitor those risks, then the most innovative technologies of today's research labs could very well be the targets of tomorrow's litigation. It's already started. In the UK, the Home Office was using an algorithm to influence visa decisions, and certain nationalities were being deemed suspect. And because of the feedback loop, the more people from a particular country that were rejected, then all the more likely future applicants from those countries would be rejected as well. Algorithmic bias at play again. But legal action forced the Home Office to stop using the algorithm. So, do we need anti discrimination laws for algorithms? How about a social contract to define our relationship with algorithms? A Hippocratic oath for algorithms, an authority similar to the US's FDA to regulate algorithms. The jury is still out on all of these approaches and interventions. You know, Helsinki and Amsterdam are good examples of public oversight, bringing more accountability and transparency to the deployment of algorithms. Last year, they announced public registers outlining how algorithms used by their city's government work, and they are governed, and how they are governed, and who is responsible. So AI must be democratically accountable to all. But is it? At this moment, it is not. But the growing codependence between big tech and governments internationally makes meaningful regulation a fantasy. Of course, there are all the NDAs tech workers must sign with little to no worker protection and no law for whistleblower protection in tech. So let's not forget grade my work, not my postcode. And that sign stood out to me recently as students were protesting in the UK a few months ago against an algorithmic decision system deployed by the Office of Qualifications and Examination Regulations that promise the best database assessment of both the general certificate of secondary education and A-level results, but delivered the worst results for students. The algorithms used were biased and discriminated based on your socioeconomic profile, not your educational profile. So algorithmic determinism is something we need to think about as we move forward as a society. And what we don't want is for algorithmic determinism to become a reality, and it can if algorithms are left unchecked. What we need is a critical understanding that algorithms are not simply a computational formula. Algorithms leave a legacy. Algorithms have the power to deny access, opportunities, wealth, and undermine the development and progress of marginalized and vulnerable groups. Multidisciplinary cosmology and interdisciplinary teams across the AI lifecycle, from design to deployment, are required. And those considered concepts such as social justice and design justice and algorithmic justice are mandatory to ensure human rights and civil rights are protected, and to ensure we remain eternally vigilant, and that we begin to advocate robustly for data rights. So let's stop and think right now. And what we're going to do is move into a few exercises.
One from Sabia. Am I right in asserting the importance of alternative platforms, including open access one or block technology in general as a means to create our own alternative set of data, one where equality and equity prevail?
Well, I think it's great to do that. And I think it's critical to start to think about other ways in which we can protect our data. So definitely advocating for those protections and advocating in ways in which we can get more creative and imaginative about the things we use for protections are critical. So what the conversation needs would be voices like Sabia's in the conversation saying, these are some alternatives. These are the things that we can try. These are the things that could create these robust ethical guardrails or the checks and balances required to push back against some of these technologies. So at this moment, I think there's so much conversation, so much dialogue that we need to hear additional voices and to amplify those voices and solutions and alternatives. So I think all hands on board would be the best way to move forward.
And I also had a question because you have, throughout the presentation, you've really put in so many different things that we could do, a lot from the policy space. Even just recently, you're just talking about whistleblower protection in the AI, you're talking about anti-discrimination in AI, and even the Hippocratic Oath for those who are engaging in AI. I am wondering, and all of that requires a certain amount of multi-stakeholder engagement to create these kinds of new policies and laws and regulations. And I'm just wondering, you speak a lot about the coded bias and how bias is baked into these algorithms. Beyond regulation, what is there anything that is being done to clean these algorithms, clean this data, clean out this bias that is already being used? And is there anything that could be done about this historical data right now?
Sure. So there are many techniques and tools that are being used from a technical space to look at the ways in which the algorithms are designed to look at the data and to try to debias the data. But what we are realizing is beyond the technical tools, it's the thinking. And you've got to think about how implicit bias informs a lot of decision making. So it's a combination of technical and thinking. And this is one of the reasons you would find many of the universities now ensuring that AI ethics or data ethics or big data ethics is part of the curriculum in any data science institution. It's critical. You've got to have that marriage from early to build the ethical resilience in data scientists and other technologists. So it's a critical aspect, and you're seeing more and more universities actually creating residencies for data activists, for individuals who can really wake us up to the impact of data in society. So it's technical, it's thinking, and it comes back to and when they come together in that design monoculture, which oftentimes just looks like, white and Asian males sitting at the table designing these technologies, that they would understand that what they're designing needs to be culturally responsive, culturally relevant, and definitely create those spaces for diversity and inclusion if we want to build equitable technology.
Yeah. So more critical thinking about the data that we are relying on to support innovation and support new practices.
Exactly. So that's why so much of what I do looks at data, looks at deconstructing it and disrupting it and rethinking and reimagining data. Because a big piece of my work right now looks at the transmission of intergenerational trauma through data, and how data sharing with different agencies just really creates traumatic experiences for families and for generations, and denying individuals access to wealth and to other ways in which they can build up, particularly in the United States when we're looking at Black, Indigenous, people of color, and other vulnerable communities.
There's another question. How can we access the data sets? This one we haven't answered yet, right? Which are used as the basis for policies being made about our lives. FOI are often costly and end up in lengthy delays and often obfuscating behind national safety responses. It's the big data sets I want to get hold of.
Well, you've got to have big money to get big data sets, and that's what big companies actually buy. I don't think any of us can go out there and buy that. Some things are open source, and we can find that. Of course, we know there are data brokers who are just scraping the internet and collecting all types of data, repurposing and reselling that data to tech companies. What I do from my perspective is I really try to inform the data scientists. So I spend a lot of time speaking to data scientists, with data scientists, in the C suite with data scientists, to build that ethical organizational culture, to build that ethical approach to emerging technology. So, I mean, I don't have access to the data sets, but when you get in front of a data set and you spend some time with me, you're going to bring that sort of critical thinking to the space and an understanding that, wait a minute, I'm not just creating an algorithm here, I'm creating a legacy. And what is that legacy going to define?
I gotta ask, are there feedback loops? Is that a repeating process that is happening, or is it once set in place and then, once the data is kind of looking and you do establish the ethical standards, that's it for the next decade? Or are you having a process where this repeats almost every year or with a frequency place?
Well, the feedback loops are there, and this is why they say these audit and impact assessments are so critical to look at that. But the challenge is many of the
Mm.
companies are not paying attention to that, because even the Algorithmic Accountability Act that was passed in April 2019 in the US was passed, but there's no real enforcement with it. There's no real bite to it. And of course, many, and I keep saying it, many of the companies, many of the institutions that are releasing these ethical frameworks for use are some of the greatest perpetrators of unethical behavior. And we're seeing that more and more in the space. So there's a lot of ethics washing happening, or the window dressing of these institutions by putting AI ethicists and data activists and in the shop window. But what we're realizing, it's just a lot of ethical theater and a lot of acting, and we're not drilling into the real ethics and really creating the protections against the kinds of harms we can see or we are already seeing with the technology.
Okay, we have another question. Mike from Chicago. He says, thank you for all the teaching in this lecture. You've mentioned the lack of whistleblower protections for AI employees insiders. Do you know of any organizations advocating for legislation in this area? Also, are there aspects of the AI world that require idiosyncratic protections that is different from those for other protections like medical providers, etc.? Is there some special way we should be thinking about protecting whistleblowers in AI?
Well, excellent question. And yes, there is. And actually, a friend of mine, a colleague who works in the space, Ifeoma Ozoma, she actually is looking at whistleblower protection, in particular, what recently happened at Google with AI ethicist Timnit Gebru, and how she was fired because of this particular research paper and her discomfort with the paper and her desire to do what was ethical and reveal the things that would create challenges with this new approach. So definitely that's happening. When it comes to the other idiosyncrasies, it's an excellent question, and it's something that you are now going to make me think about, because I think what we've been seeing so far in much of what is being done in the space is really similar to just about any profession where people would be using sensitive data or sensitive information when it comes to confidentiality, when it comes to revealing information, when it comes to disclosing or non-disclosing. So I think it is as general as that, we do no harm with this technology and we protect against all things that could do harm. But I will definitely look into that just for myself to see if there's any other things that we could look at. So Mike from Chicago, thank you very much.
That's a really good question. Um, we have a question from someone who prefers to remain nameless, and it's a sensitive question. Dear Renée, I wonder, has your work been faced with the backlash that currently characterizes critical race studies, as seen recently during the Trump presidency, but also recently here at the UK Parliament?
Well, I wouldn't say my work in particular, but I would say the work in general, because more and more we are seeing that AI ethicists are being fired from their positions at big tech companies. So it's real. We also have seen, particularly within the realm of AI, actually Black women and women of color who have been the ones really stepping up to the front line and calling this technology out. And when they are doing that and presenting their research, not only are they being disrespected, but they are being discredited and gaslighted in social media. So definitely it is having a critical impact on what's going on in the industry. And more, we are seeing that, AI's biases are not only in the data sets. I hope that answers your question.
It's just crazy to me because what I'm hearing from you is that what is actually very obvious on the surface, like these biases, I mean, it's quite easy to see them once you see the data and once you take a look at how, for example, the women of color are treated, and you see that there is a discrepancy between the data and what the algorithms produce and how it should be actually ethically acceptable. But I'm just wondering if we have so much trouble with something that is so obvious to someone that actually takes a look at it, how many different biases we actually have that have not been surfaced like that. I mean, this
Well, there are lots of them. It's not only about race, it's about gender, it's about access, it's about geography. That's a bias in AI, the global north versus the global south, where the global south, let's say Caribbean countries, have already been written off the AI map, saying that these countries have nothing to offer when it comes to data or when it comes to technology, the ways in which we are looking and the things that we are building and who's building up and what spaces are being built up. So it's really out there, but it's just not as easy as that, because you've got to always think, and particularly in the US context, about something like implicit bias or systemic racism and how these things become a part of the design imagination of the designers and the developers of these algorithms, and how implicit bias informs the ethical imagination as well. And when you go into that space, you realize how deeply rooted the biases are and how people can often not see past them. And sometimes the exact institutions that are saying that they are not biased oftentimes do events and panels and don't include a woman or don't include Black women, or just have a man panel, a manil with only men, so all of these things
A manner.
happen. And just like that, you look back, and you ask yourself, hey, how could you do that? Recently I just saw something happening in the UK that looks at racial profiling and stop and search in the UK from a policing perspective. And the entire panel was all white, not one person of color to discuss, from law enforcement, to discuss something that impacts communities of color, and it's just not thought about. So it's that deep.
we gotta walk the talk. So I don't actually want to pose more questions because I am very much excited about the exercises that are now following. Do you want to continue with those?
So I think we were going to do them, have each one do it individually and then come back and have a discussion. Yeah, Renee.
Sure.
So shall you share what the exercise is and the time frame that you're giving people to do that exercise?
Were we able to put the questions in the chat?
Yeah.
We did that.
Did we?
We
No, we haven't put it in the chat,
And
but we will.
basically, we have two questions. Oh, you can put it in. And we start with the first one, which is: you are given the responsibility to audit or run an impact assessment on commercial software being deployed in the criminal justice system. So you're going to create a list of questions that would be part of your audit or impact assessment. That's the first question. And we will give you, how much time, Margaret, do you want to give? You can decide on that.
10 minutes.
Okay, or maybe 15 if they need a little more. So 10 is fine. And the second question would be, you're given the responsibility to procure a risk assessment tool, which is an algorithmic decision-making system for the criminal justice system. What kinds of questions should criminal justice agencies be asking vendors when purchasing these risk assessment tools from them? So we do one, we come back and we discuss, we do another, we come back and we discuss.
Yeah, because we had set this up as a webinar, we did not set it up so that we can do the breakout sessions so that people can work together. So if it's okay, if you can just reflect on the first question, guys, which is
Given the responsibility to audit and run an impact assessment on commercial software being deployed in the criminal justice system, you're going to create a list of your vulnerability audit or your impact assessment on these algorithms, and you're going to put what the questions are that should be a part of any kind of impact assessment for this software.
Okay, and so we will give you, let's say 12 minutes then. We'll go a happy medium between 10 and 15. 12 minutes, and we will be muting and coming off video right now for 12 minutes, and we'll come back to have an open discussion on this first question. You have to conduct an algorithmic impact assessment audit on commercial software deployed in the criminal justice system. What do you think would be the kinds of questions that would be part of your impact assessment? Just take a few minutes to just reflect on that, and then we'll come back together and discuss it. So, yeah, Renée, would you like to kick off the answers on this, or would you like to receive the answers from some of the participants? You're on mute. You're on mute.
Yeah, sure. It's about their answers. So I think it would be great for us to hear what they have to say and some of the things they've presented.
Okay, guys, so you can signal to us, if you raise your hand, if you'd like us to promote you to panelists to come in and discuss your answers with Renée. Or if you're shy, you can post it in the chat. Come on, I think everyone will learn from each other. We'll all learn from each other. Here, there's nothing right or wrong per se. It's really about discussion and opening up the space for dialogue on what are the kinds of questions you would ask if you've been brought in to do an algorithmic impact assessment on commercial software deployed in the criminal justice system. Ooh.
We have from
Fee. Fee, would you like to be promoted to panelist, and just because that's a lot to read? Yes?
I'm gonna post mine as well.
Sure. So Anya, can you promote Fee to panelist, because I think you're a host now?
Here, I've allowed you to talk, so you can unmute yourself and start talking.
Hi.
Hello.
Oh, hang on. I don't think I can turn my camera on, but that's fine.
That's fine.
So
you're able to try it again. You're on mute and your camera is off.
Okay, right, we're here now. Hello.
Hello. Good to
Hi,
see
Fee.
This is amazing. Thank you so much for doing this. This is just awesome. Okay, so fundamentally, I come from a position of co-production, which is ensuring that the voices of lived experience are centered at all conversations that are making decisions about their lives. It seems like such a simple system, and yet it's something that so few people even vaguely can contemplate. So for me, I want to know who's responsible for gathering this data and designing this system. How are you ensuring that the voices of those people with lived experience of the receiving end of the criminal justice system, i.e. those who are or have been incarcerated, and also their families, their extended communities, are included from the very beginning to ensure that co-production, that their voices will be included at the very start of the development of this tech. Who's creating this technology and economically benefiting from its creation and use? Are they known to be an ethical, inclusive, diverse, equality and equity-centered company? Which I'm smiling while I'm saying that, because probably not. Will this tech use big data sets and machine learning? And is there known bias in those data sets before this process even starts? And does the company have any known past bias misuse of data sets and AI? How will you ensure that bias is limited in this new tech? Who will verify it, test it, and document it? How are you ensuring transparency and accountability within your build processes and the delivery of the tech? What standards will you be holding yourself to before, during, and after the release of this new build? Because often longevity of these things is just not considered. What protections and defenses are available to those who will be the most high risk if or when this tech comes to market? Do legal aid systems that are fit for purpose exist in those countries to ensure that individuals can easily and affordably protect themselves where duty of care and bias have been neglected?
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much, Fee.
Thanks.
Okay. Do we have, I'm looking at the chat. Sabiha, I see, Anya, you've promoted Mike. Did Mike say he wanted to say something?
So I saw his hand up and
okay.
I just promoted you. So
okay, we have Mike and then we have Sabiha.
There we go.
Hi, sorry about that. I just figured it would be easier because the list of questions is so long to speak them than put them in the chat and have everybody read them. I found these really interesting assignments, and as somebody who doesn't really have the technical background to even know what to look at in an audit, I sort of did an end run thinking about how I would go after officials that were adopting it to question that they really did what I feel like they should do as officials in terms of their due diligence. So on the first issue, I had the following questions. Who were the governmental decision makers that chose to adopt this as an official tool? What information did they have available to make this decision? What condition did they believe the tool would accurately measure a report? What objective assessments did they perform to test whether the tool is more accurate than human decision makers on that issue prior to adopting it? What objective assessments have they performed since adopting it to test whether the tool is in fact more accurate on that issue? If human decision makers are using the tool as one of multiple inputs to the decision, what are you doing to make sure that the human is not unduly crediting the AI input over other data used for that decision? And then the last one on the audit is, what have you done to train the human decision makers on the problems of bias in AI generally and of the specific susceptibilities of this particular tool?
Well done, Mike. That was excellent.
Well, just trying to figure out how to sue these guys. I'll tell you what I have on the other question if you want it.
No, not just yet, not just yet, not just yet. Okay, Mike, we'll hold on the second question. Because we were supposed to just look at the first question. Isn't that so, Renée?
Yes, we'll do that. And I'm thinking what we could do is after we do the first question, I'll just finish up with the next piece of my talk, and then we could do that one, yeah? Just to give a little break in between it.
Okay, got it. We have a response from Sabia, who is shy, and that's all good. But she did have her response higher up. And here it is. Shall I read it out for Sabia? How far does the data go back to? Is the software up to date? That is, what are the risks of mix-ups? Does the data take into account uncertain outcomes or pending decisions? Do the aims of the software align with its current usage? Are the individuals using it trained in detecting algorithmic hiccups? When was the last time it was audited? How many institutions, departments, centers, etc. rely on this very software? That is the possibility of duplicating errors. Good one. What is this software being used for? And I think this is incredible stuff, guys. I mean, what you all, the questions that you all are asking are so on point and so relevant. Fee and Mike, if you all can also copy and paste your answers in this chat, because I think it will benefit everyone to have it in written form. We will share it with you all with the PowerPoint after, with the questions and other reference material that Renée has developed for you to deepen your understanding in this area. So Fee and Mike, please share it there. Those of you who are getting ongoing access to the recording, of course, will get it there as well.
Margaret, I took the liberty and took that step already. So there's a shared Google Doc at the end of the chat. And I've been copy pasting a couple of these answers that we have. Sorry, guys, I'm collecting it just like the AI does it. But I promise we won't be processing it or sharing it with anyone else. So feel free to click on that and edit it. There's also going to be, or is already, pasted question, the second one, and we can actually take that exercise to really collaboratively just dump everything that crosses our mind there.
And that's a good point. You just by sharing that we're not sharing your data with anyone else, please take a look, and maybe on that Google Doc, Anya, you could just put a link to Future Law's privacy policy so people know that they're submitting it subject to what we have committed to in terms of the use of data. We also have Dharmashaktini. I like to pride myself in pronouncing these things properly. Dharmashaktini. Am I pronouncing it right? Let me just say Dharma. Yeah. All right. Dharma has answered. 1, who is the end? Dharma, would you like to come up and say and share your questions yourself? Talking permitted. You can talk, Dharma.
She said yes. You are pronouncing it correct, so go ahead.
So she doesn't want to come up.
The connection is bad.
Okay. Who? Sorry, I can't see because I'm further up in the chat. So her questions are: who is the end user? That's the first one. Then I have to go down a little bit. Sorry, guys. Okay, a lot of things came in between. Sorry. Who is the end user? 2, what are the data procurement procedures? Okay. 3, what are the variables? 4, who monitors the data? That is accountability and transparency. 5, reasons for data exclusion. 6, what are the inherent bias in the software? 7, how long is the data stored and its scope of use in the criminal justice system? So Renée, has anyone else? Well, Anya has answered as well. Do you want to share your answer?
I'm also embarrassed because my answers are far from what you guys are putting together. So I'm not even going to go through that. I posted it in the Google Doc, but I mean, to me, it was all about what the false negative might be and, just how sensitive the data is, for example, to the time, or because I know that there were a couple of cases where, for example, it was through the data, seeing that judges, for example, are taking better decisions or are more keen to actually favor the person that is being judged after the lunch in comparison to what is happening before the lunch. So that data is obviously time sensitive, or it's not really the data, but the judgment itself that is time sensitive or lunch sensitive. Anyhow, so yeah, my questions were far more different than you guys. And then there might be some geographically sensitive data as well. What are we aiming for, and what are the alternative ways to obtain that data? If this is really the only way, and how it might actually change if we add something or remove something from the equation. But yeah, it's a bit of a different.
I love how your brain works, Anya Bly. That's why you're my partner. So Renée, we've heard all of these, different takes on the kinds of questions that they were asked. There's a lot of overlap and intersection. What would you say? How would you look at this?
Well, actually, the reason I asked the questions was just to do a little brain fertilizing, and I think these brains are very fertilized because those are exactly the answers that I was looking for, and the answers, but the questions being asked are simply not the questions we're asking right now in the criminal justice system, and that is the challenge we have because the criminal justice practitioners who are using these systems, procuring it, and who have to do these vulnerability audits just don't have that insight into the algorithms and into the reasons why there needs to be an ethical application. So they're just buying things and thinking that this is just going to be another way, to, speed things up without any sort of critical thinking. So these questions are questions we are hoping that will be asked, or there is some sort of documentation that's created, or standardized documentation created in the criminal justice system in all our industries for these questions to be asked. So I think what we can do now is I can continue with my talk, and then after that we can deal with the second one. So just let me know when to start.
Yeah, you
Okay.
start.
So we cannot have a conversation about AI ethics and algorithmic justice without having a conversation about facial recognition and mass surveillance technologies and how they're being used to track, trace, terrorize, and traumatize. So invasive and intrusive mass surveillance technologies literally have us cornered. Everywhere we turn, we are on camera, some of us more than others, depending on where those cameras are located, where we are going, who we are going with, and what we are doing. Facial recognition technologies, computer vision tools, carry a very dubious distinction. Biometric technologies and personal data technologies are powerful and the benefits extraordinary and often very convenient with the ability to make our daily lives easier and better. You could use your face to unlock your phone or gain access to your home or your job or prevent financial fraud and protect yourself from identity theft. In healthcare, as AI is bringing us into the realm of precision healthcare, we are seeing that facial recognition technologies are being used to explore real-time responses to pain management, where facial recognition could analyze the face of a patient and make a decision in real time on how much pain someone is in by recognizing pain levels through facial features and facial expressions. Facial recognition is also being explored as an early intervention for stroke victims to recognize, again, facial features, detect strokes earlier by tracing the contours of facial movements. So now that's the part of the story where facial recognition save lives. But here's the part of the story where facial recognition can destroy lives. Wrongful arrest by facial recognition in the US because the technology says it cannot tell Black people apart. A Detroit man was arrested by facial recognition and held in a cell for 30 hours. And not once did any of the police officers ask to see his driver's license because they simply believed the technology was accurate. They believed the computer because the computer said so. They believed the technology over using their own eyes. The misuse of the technology because of the lack of ethical guidelines and because many in law enforcement don't understand the risk of this technology continues to create challenges for the industry. Facial recognition technologies, as used in law enforcement, have overpromised and underdelivered. It has not been vetted for accuracy. Facial recognition has proven to be least effective on people of color and on women. Racial bias and gender bias have been revealed in a real world application of facial recognition. In the summer of 2020, because of the George Floyd riots in the US and the movement for racial justice, big tech companies that were developing these technologies and selling them to law enforcement put a moratorium on facial recognition research and development. But that moratorium is about to expire in June. In the US, there's no federal regulation. In March 2019, a facial recognition act reached the US Senate, but there has been no movement since then. In Europe, there's definitely more discussion around the risks of the technology and the search for a best practice application in the law enforcement context, and of course, in criminal justice. More and more legal scholars are examining facial recognition and mass surveillance technologies. The interest is growing exponentially. Bias and discrimination are real in AI. When you combine that with this technology and the lack of training and implicit bias and systemic racism and police power and police discretion, you could understand how deadly facial recognition could be. It also means that every time we step foot out of our doors, we are now in a virtual police lineup. Could you imagine what a bad actor, someone with a deadly motive, could do with this technology? Are we making the future look like the past with new and emerging technologies such as facial recognition, in which bias and discrimination are heavily encoded? Privacy, civil liberties, civil rights, transparency, accountability, explainability, trust, and the redefining of public spaces are all critical conversations around facial recognition. It disrupts civil liberties, free speech, assembly, association, due process, and equal protection under the law. It circumvents judicial norms and legal precedent. It happens under the veil of secrecy and without public consent, largely outside the purview of lawmakers. It is disproportionately used against Black and Brown people, minoritized populations, marginalized and vulnerable communities. When you combine all of these with the often cavalier practices of law enforcement, then you understand the devastation that facial recognition is creating. There's widespread support for facial recognition to be banned, and it has already been banned in several US cities, and widespread support that it should be regulated. But the big question is how. It is our right to be identified, as well as it is our right not to be identified if we so desire. It is also the right of the accused to be informed how they were identified, and facial recognition violates that right because it cannot be challenged in court and is really not used in court because it is inadmissible. Of course, there's the question of the expansion of government surveillance, drone warfare, and the dire need for tech justice, algorithmic justice. And here we have yet another case of algorithmic injustice, the deployment of facial recognition technologies by law enforcement. So, bias, fairness, the knowledge to advocate for legislation, all critical to AI ethics and critical to algorithmic justice, and why designing for algorithmic justice is indeed one of the most riveting conversations at this moment, and why data rights will indeed be the civil rights movement of this generation. So I just wanted to put that out there. So now we could move into the second question.
But I think there's so much to discuss there too, though,
Right.
what you just raised. I mean, Anya and I were having a conversation about this a few weeks ago, or a couple months ago, and she raised. I shared the link in the chat. With Google's algorithms, they were identifying Black people as gorillas in their algorithms, in their search stuff. I mean, and you spoke about using facial recognition. I think you said it in a positive light to be able to determine the pain levels of certain
Definitely in
people.
healthcare. So there are
Yeah,
areas that we see that
but
could be.
I think that even that has been seriously challenged because there's been some developments in neuroscience that have shown that relying on patterns of movement in the face that's not reliable for emotional issues and certainly for pain. And so the fact that they're still wondering, and that's why, as you know, Black people have been, in terms of pain in the healthcare
And
system,
yeah, definitely in terms of pain
disproportionately.
management. Yeah, I think what they're doing is it's dealing with your face, not faces in general, because there are pictures that you would have that creates that continuum of what your face looks like and what your face looks like at particular times. So they're
Okay.
tracking on the individual's face, not on the face of a particular community. So it comes to like facial recognition technologies that are being used to design to look at emotions, which are totally pseudoscience, or to watch the gait of someone, or the ways in which a man, or and somebody walks and then says this person is criminal and all of that. So all of the pseudoscience part is totally out there, but I know Stanford University has been doing a lot of research. But as I said, the technology is based on your face, because it is your phone that you're using to access your face, and not the face of an entire community, which will definitely be, because so much of facial expression could be cultural as well, which is very, very important for us to think about.
Okay. I see while you're talking, Deborah has shared her questions, and we'll paste that into the Google Doc. We won't go back to that. But does anyone have any questions or reflections you'd like to share on this last piece that Renée spoke about before we go to the last exercise? Nope. So, Anya, maybe you'll share the next question and on the screen.
Absolutely.
And we'll give about 12 minutes, Renée.
12? Okay. Let me change. There we go.
Okay, guys, so we'll give you another few minutes to look at this question, and then we'll come back and just round table and close off. All right, so let's see who's answered in the chat. Deborah. We'll look at evidence of success and failure, I guess, of the company bidding or of the product that has been used. Understanding of current thinking and discussion around bias and the impact of said biases. Evidence that testing has taken place to remove, mitigate inbuilt discrimination. That's a good one. List of shareholders on board with background checks. Yes, the generic ones in any procurement.
That's always a good one.
Site of policies, including oh dear, the chat jumped for me because someone put something in. Sorry, let's go back. The chat jumped for me.
That's Deborah's. I could continue.
Yeah, can you with
background
Deborah?
checks,
With your voice, Renée.
Sorry?
With your voice. But go ahead if you're up to it.
Hold on, I'm trying. Donation lists, track record of delivery of said tool in similar areas, cost effectiveness, the leadership team for delivery, the ability for changes to be made if it's found and the tool is not fit for purpose. So Deborah, those are some good questions. Thank you very much.
I have a question for Deborah though. Donations list.
Hello. Yes.
Hi.
Because because there are political biases that also exist. It's not just inbuilt discrimination, and some people will be where the money goes. If I'm investing money in buying a product, I want to know where the money's going and what it's going towards, which is sort of similar to the previous question when I asked about which other countries would have been using, what other countries had used, are using the system, and what, so that you got an idea. If there are particular countries that discrimination, they're never going to change the way that they operate. And so it's along those lines, really, thinking about where they're donating and who their stake shareholders are, and where the money that we're investing in a tool is going to be invested and used elsewhere.
I think it's an excellent question, and I'll tell you why. Because one of the things we're seeing now is, particularly with AI, the tools and the techniques and the strategies that are being developed within the academy, within the universities, you're realizing that big tech is funding those scientific and STEM programs. So most of the academics who have been doing the research are actually being funded by the big tech companies. So what we're seeing there again is that sort of relationship, because big tech seems to be funding everything in the private, in the public, in academia, just about everywhere, to sort of look at those donations and the kind of funding that's coming into the programs, the science programs, the labs that are being sponsored are really important to see how those technologies are moving and who's really pushing them forward. So excellent question, Deborah. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I do want to pipe in on it, though, because it's challenging to be able to put donation where people are donating money, where companies are donating money as a criteria in a procurement process. And if it's a criminal justice system, certainly that's a public sector organization. So there would be challenges with that kind of criteria because of how you will go about policing how companies invest their money. It's about freedom of expression. Issues come up, equality issues come up, because these are political positionings. And I see how important it is, Deborah. So I agree that it is important. And it can really guide you to know, well, can I really rely on these people because this is where their money is going and this is where how they're thinking about an issue. But it's going to be really tricky to be able to develop that. You would really have to create a very special sort of process where you put caveats up front that you're doing this so that all bidders know that where they put their money is going to be something that will be taken into consideration.
No, absolutely. No, absolutely. And I think that that's important because if you're clear from the very beginning, you're less likely to get people you're more likely to get people who sit in the dark space, but it enables you to then make a decision saying we were very clear from the beginning that this was all a part of our process and these were things that were being considered and this is what we were thinking about. So if people who, some of the big tech companies who expect to get contracts and they don't get contracts, then you can say, well, we were very clear at the beginning that this was something that we were looking at and this is something that we were considering. So as opposed to we give you the money and tell you what you can and can't do with it. It's foregrounding it with people. And
I think that and I don't want to cut you too much and all of that, but because we have other people to get to, but I do want to just respond to the point, which is why I'm kind of jumping in, because there are regulations which govern the way we procure. And even foregrounding an issue such as this may not be enough to stem off a challenge that really and truly the regulations speak to buying on a most economically advantageous approach. And when you have regulations that are speaking to these are the fixed criteria that you should be taken into consideration, it may be difficult even if you foreground these issues, because if another bidder has donated in a different way and presents a more economically advantageous offer, we have challenges there. I don't know why this last question Renée put out is a procurement question, because it's activating me as it should not. I should step back a little bit.
That's
now.
Exactly why I put it there. Exactly why
Right.
I put it there, to have the discussion going. And which is important because so much is being procured right now by every industry. So even healthcare, by these startups and developers who are creating these systems, and of course, not knowing what do we ask, and particularly in governments now where they're procuring more algorithmic decision-making systems for just about everything that they're doing. So I think it's something that we've got to think about.
And it's a big issue because it means that we have to look at how do we adapt the regulation of procurement for AI, even before you look to
Exactly.
try to implement certain things in your organizations, because we may need more leeway and more flexibility to be able to look at what is the social impact of this particular product that we are bringing in, this risk assessment tool. We have Mike saying this is not a vendor question, but perhaps Future Law could, okay, we will look at that shortly. Let's look at Fee. Fee, you want to come up and share your, instead of me reading it out, Fee? Anya, you want to promote Fee?
Hi. Oh. Okay, so I found this one harder because I think knowing the specificities of the criminal justice system would better inform it, and I don't have that knowledge. So rather, I didn't want to just sort of paste the same answers, but I think a lot of the same answers from the first question apply. So I'd want to be looking at what questions does this specific tool ask, and are they strictly necessary for the specific purpose in that instance?
Oh, sorry, I think I interrupted you, Fee. That was not intentionally. I just promoted you to the panelist, but I am aware of the fact that the Zoom does something to you.
Yeah, it sends me a different link, so it gets me to reconnect. But anyway, that's fine. So yeah, what was the first bit? So yeah, basically, are the tools specifically relevant to each individual instance of their use? And are they going to be managing the appropriate level of questioning for each individual, maintaining the privacy and protection of the individual, not just the criminal justice systems or the person who's running that query at all times? Where will the data be stored, for how long? Who will have access to it, both within your organization and wherever it's stored, if it's in the cloud, or will any of it be actually going back to the tech company who produced the system? What bias explorations have you held with your staff who will be using these tools, and what measures against bias will be made to protect each of the risk assessments held using the tech? And also, how digitally literate are the users of the system, and are they fully aware of their personal legal responsibility for any legal repercussions of improper use of the system or the data it gathers? Because the laws are different in different countries around the personal liability or the organizational liability for any use of these tools.
Yeah, and that last one that you've just raised, I mean, links to capacity building. You know, what training and systems and capacity building does the company that's bidding have in place to ensure that this kind of literacy is there with the people who will actually be using the system?
And as we've seen through COVID, the lack of digital literacy, even now, is astonishing. I mean, I've been using this stuff for 25 years. And I wasn't there at the beginning. And the general lack of not just literacy, but confidence in using digital tools is shocking. It astonishes me that we're still fumbling around with digital etiquette and, you know, how to behave online as opposed to how to behave face to face. The things that we do online are just mind-boggling by comparison to the way that we behave when we're in a physical proximity to each other, and the disparities around disability use as well. I mean, we're constantly hearing this desire to get back to normal. I mean, I hate the word normal, full stop, but for so many of us, I'm autistic and ADHD, and I much prefer being able to use the digital space. It's much more safe and comfortable for me. So I don't want us to go back to everything being demanding us to do these ridiculous commutes and expensive commutes and having to physically be in proximity with each other. I want us to be able to integrate what we've learned from the COVID experience and actually create more opportunity for everybody, rather than just going, oh, well, let's go back. We hated using technology, so let's go back to never using it again. Sorry, I'll shut up now.
I agree. That's all I can say. You have a convert in me. You have a, I'm with you. Sabia, because Anya will tell you, I feel the same way about the digital space, that it provides you a safety and a comfort and which for some people actually helps you to blossom and grow and do well. But for others, it empowers them to treat people in a way in which they would never have done face to face. And
yeah, and it's so frustrating. Sorry, just one more thing, that we've been asking for these concessions for decades, and they've been repeatedly, every single answer has been, oh, it's too difficult, no, it's not possible, no, we can't do this, it would cost too much, it would take too long, we'd have to retrain our entire workforce, da, 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 da. And we've just seen how easy it is. So we need to keep it, right?
For sure. And those changes are happening. I know those changes are happening across the board in many organizations. We have Sabia, who I know is shy, but always submitting really brilliant responses here. Her questions: who is the vendor? What is their history? Who or what is their parent company? Good question. Who are the middlemen? Good question. Who has been sold this tool before? When was it last updated? What are the risks being assessed? How are these risks calculated? What are the gendered and racialized and other biases of these calculations? Are these calculations unbiased? And how can you assure us that they're not? Do they assume links between particular variables? What are the assumptions and how are they justifying the assumptions that they're making? Are the patterns that the tool generates regularly monitored, right? Have they been analyzed? Once analyzed, have the root problems, that is the biases, been dealt with? Are the tools very algorithms being used elsewhere? I mean, really, really great question, Sabi, and I love how you did it in almost like, a logical way. First set of questions and just developing from there. Mike, provide a comprehensive list of proofs for why you claim your system could be trusted. Absolutely, should be trusted. Will you open up your algorithm and data sets to fairness testing in the courts by waiving claims of, ooh, this is a lawyer. This is a lawyer. I love it. Will you open up your algorithm and data sets to fairness testing in the courts by waiving claims of trade secret protection so that those people who are investigated, arrested, charged, imprisoned as a result of your algorithm can fully challenge it? I love that. That is something that, we really should.
Very exciting. This was very, very exciting stuff.
Yeah.
Mike.
Yeah, put it into the criteria. Listen, if you are bidding to put this in for a criminal justice system, you are going to waive your rights. You're expressly waiving any rights that you have that prevents us from looking at that algorithm. I see Anya, stroking her chin. She's like, what's happening there? But yeah, 3, if not, what substitute adversary process, or adversarial process have you put your AI through to demonstrate reliability? That is one where there is a full incentive to disprove the reliability of your algorithm and without any conflicts of interest, perhaps like a bug bounty or white hat hacker award. Yeah. If you have not done so, why not? And if you haven't, would you be willing to engage in a process of that prior to us, a monitored process with us prior to you being implemented? And Dharma Shaktini has also come in. 1, scope of liability excluded by vendor. Scope of liability excluded by vendor. Right, same, okay, as above, you're trying to limit in there how much they can reduce their liability. How far reaching is the decision making? How minimal is human input? What are the foreseen or unforeseen problems, disclosure issues? What are improvements planned for the system? Compliance with standards and due diligence, evidence of successful implementation. Yeah, or really good questions. And I would add, what systems are in place? Because, you know, Renée, you have me thinking about this cleaning of data issue as well. You know, we hadn't thought about it before this masterclass. But, you know, what systems do you have in place to constantly be checking and rechecking, you know, the feedback loops, and so the data and the systems that you have that are informing your risk assessment? Yeah, great questions, Dharma. Renée, I put it now in your hands.
Well, of course, thank you. Those were some fantastic responses to both questions. Really intellectually exciting. I just want to say, with all that we have discussed, that I need to just put it out there. And I always do. I'm very passionate about AI and passionate about using the technology and developing my own products with this technology for various systems, not only criminal justice. I mean, AI has extraordinary power, potential, and promise, but those protections have got to be in place for us to ensure that the legacy of this technology is really something that creates limited harms. I mean, there's no perfect algorithm. There will never be a perfect technology because the creators of the technology are imperfect and we are imperfect. But what we can certainly do is have those ethical guardrails and the legislation and the regulation and the enforcement and the redress and all those things that are there just to ensure that when we look at the long-term impacts of data in society and we look back, and as we continue to look forward, we realize that this is a legacy that we can certainly be proud of. So, Margaret, thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you to all you fantastic participants. I'm hoping that we would connect in other spaces, maybe LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, wherever you are. You can just always reach out. And it's been a great experience. And Anya and Margaret, thank you again. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Renée, first of all, for, I know you weren't well, and for a little while, and you've been back-to-back sessions, and you said, no, I've committed to this, I'm going to come and be here. And the 3 hours has been a lot, but thank you so much for, you know, your commitment and your integrity and your passion and for this topic that I know everyone in this room has felt. And I want to thank everyone who's plugged in from all over the world to this webinar. It's been really great. Those of you who've had the courage to share and speak, you're awesome, you're rock stars. It's incredible. Because I know it's not an easy thing to do to just meet people for the first time and jump in. I want to encourage all of you to stay plugged in with Anya and I at Future Law, futurelaw.io. You'll see all that we do there. What we're trying to do is build a community of practitioners who and professionals, experts, system thinkers who are looking to work together to collaborate on policy innovation for a better future. So you're looking at a safer world, a more just world, a more regenerative environment. If so, we really want you to plug in there with us. Lots of other different types of masterclasses. So those of you who've plugged in here, most of you are probably really passionate about AI ethics. But we also feel that, you know, as professionals going forward, as future-oriented professionals, what we need to do is develop a really broad understanding of all of the issues that are emerging in the law and policy spaces so that we can start integrating this knowledge so that it's not just everyone just being really specialized in a particular thing. You know, each of us have our specializations, but there really is, I think, a shift taking place right now in education where we're recognizing that we have to develop, it's almost like a new Renaissance period. That's what Anya calls it. And that's what we call it in Future Law, a new Renaissance period where instead of deep specialization, or in addition to deep specialization, we are able to see the connections between fields and with other fields and disciplines so that we can then be able to advise the companies that we're advising and develop policies that are far more relevant. Because if you're developing your policies in silos and taking action in silos, then we are living through a period right now that is showing us how unsustainable that kind of interaction as professionals is. So just want to, Anya, have you shared the WhatsApp group so that they could stay connected with us there? Those of you, one final thing, those of you who are going to get access to this masterclass afterwards permanently, you will get that link within the next couple of days, because we do edit out, of course, the long pauses and those kinds of things. So we do have a little editing period. You might get it Monday or Tuesday. Those of you who've signed up to go a little deeper and work on the certificate of participation in this program, and you can still do that if you want to. If you haven't signed up for that and you want to, you can still do it. But if you want to do that, we encourage you to take those 2 questions that we just went into, and we will send you the instructions. It's going to be the same 2 questions, but we'd want you to produce something in writing, and we will give you the scope for that in the next couple of days. So yeah, it's been really great. Our WhatsApp link is there. Join us there. Anya, any final?
Thank
Don't
you
go
all.
yet, Renée. We're still
Thank
thanking
you.
you. Yeah, Anya, go
I
ahead.
know we all have to go, but thank you so much for spending the Saturday afternoon with us. And it's been really an amazing opportunity to get to know you better, Renée, your work, and to actually go through these exercises. It's the first time we've done the masterclass this way, and I think it's setting a benchmark, honestly speaking. So thank you so much.